Over 50 years ago, along the St. Lawrence, the villages of Mill Rush, Moulinet, Wales, Dickinson's Landing, Ferrens Point, and Altsville, the hamlets of Woodlands, Santa Cruz, and Maple Grove, and further west, the villages of Morrisburg and Iroquois existed as picturesque river communities. By 1954, the lives of those who resided in these communities along the St. Lawrence River were changed forever. The reason for this disruption was Canadian progress and the St. Lawrence Seaway and Power Project, a collaboration of Canadian and American governments which was said to hold great promise for the future of these areas. But this promise was not without sacrifice. Buildings were destroyed, houses were moved, entire towns resituated on new sites, the old villages left behind to be lost forever, leaving only remnants of what used to be. To complete the project, 6,500 people would be moved, and much of the land that had provided for these people for generations would succumb to the waters of Lake St. Lawrence. Today, the project has been finished for 50 years, and the new communities of Long Sault and Ingleside, as well as Morrisburg and Iroquois, retained the picturesque reputation of old, and yet many of the promises from the Seaway project are still to be fulfilled. In the 1530s, during Jacques Cartier's second voyage to Canada, the French navigator was traveling west on the mighty St. Lawrence in an effort to find the Northwest Passage to the Orient. As he came to the area now known as Montreal, his voyage was quickly ended by the rushing waters of the Lachine Rapids. Over the next centuries, a number of attempts at bridging the St. Lawrence's traversable passes were carried out. In fact, several canals were completed by 1848, successfully connecting Montreal to Lake Erie via the Welland Canal. This was followed by discussions between Canada and the U.S. about a deep waterway system that would permit ocean-going vessels to reach the Great Lakes. By 1909, extensive studies had been executed to assess the viability of a seaway, but the project remained a dream.
My earliest recollection of the deep waterway was my father planning a new building. He had originally purchased a renovated blacksmith shop for a garage in 1924, and by 1929 he wanted to expand, and many people, all people, would say to him, well, you're crazy to build anything. The deep waterway is going to come and flood you out.
In June of 1954, it was finally announced by the Canada and U.S. governments that the project would be going ahead. Unfortunately, to do so, mass flooding would have to be carried out. This was, effectively, a sentencing of doom for the communities between Cardinal and Cornwall. While the project would be executed with precision, completed on time and on budget, it would be responsible for disrupting the lives of thousands of riverfront inhabitants. Their lives, as they knew them, would be changed forever. Along the river, from Mill Rush to Iroquois, before the Seaway project, life was different than it is today. While many of the things experienced in the old towns are still carried on today, life before the Seaway took place in a different era. It was simply a different way of life.
We came to town every Saturday night for groceries, and you had to be there early because Main Street was lined both sides with cars. And if you wanted a good parking spot so you could see who was in town and what they were doing, you got there early.
It was just something going through the main part of Iroquois. And Morrisburg was roughly the same, and probably the lost villages on east here as well. One of the big events in old Morrisburg was, and Iroquois, people did their shopping on Saturday evenings. And the cars would be lined up and down the streets and while people were doing their shopping. And of course, the old Cameo Theater in Morrisburg where Roy Rogers and Gene Audrey and some of the old cowboy stars used to be. But before my time was the music hall, and I guess that was the showcase of Morrisburg. There was like minstrel shows, and people would bring their own films and put on these shows. There was even a burlesque show at one time, much to the chagrin of the local residents. They didn't think it was quite proper to have a burlesque show here in Morrisburg.
Outside of Morrisburg, on the way to Ottsville, the site to visit on Saturday night was the White House Ranch.
As a teenager, I can remember I was not allowed to go to dances, but a girlfriend and I went with a guy down to what was called the White House Ranch. I believe it was a dance hall. And then, of course, we had to make sure we got home early. But yeah, that's what we did. We would go into the restaurant with a Coke and sit there half the night sipping on one Coke.
In Moulinet, Saturday night was a busy one for the Wet Hotel.
My grandfather was a barber in Moulinet, and he was right beside the one Wet Hotel in the area. Actually, there was another one outside of Millrush. But it was quite a place to be during the Seaway. And as a young fellow, I would go up on the weekends, and my grandfather stayed open until the hotel closed. And he joked that sometimes when it closed at 12 o'clock on a Saturday night, then the fellows came in for their shave and haircut for church on Sunday. He had to strap them in the chair because he shaved them with a straight razor and he didn't want to cut them.
While Saturday night on Main Street was the main event for local residents, the picturesque communities along the river certainly had much to see and do. Fishing, boat races in Iroquois, and of course hockey, as is true in most Canadian towns and cities, were among these activities. In the decades immediately before the Seaway, industry in the area, from Millrush to Iroquois, was booming. In Morrisburg, tourist homes thrived as the town played host to the patients of Dr. Locke, the legendary foot doctor from Williamsburg, whose presence successfully cushioned the surrounding areas from the devastating effects of the Great Depression.
One of the most important and nicest tourist homes was the George Frederick, located immediately east of where the United Church is now, and that's the house owned by Dr. Schnurr. On Saturday night, when I came to town, that place was like a fairyland with the shuffleboard court and all the lights over it, and it was a beautiful spot. And then at the east end of town was Rosedale, another beautiful spot. And the present golf club was owned by Mrs. Federley, who owned Rosedale, and was started by her to accommodate the people that lived there. And then, of course, Allison's Farm, east of Morrisburg, was a place by itself.
In Iroquois, a similar prosperity was being experienced by the strength of their industry.
The area was prosperous then. Colwyn and Mill had 500 employees, and Canada Starch were busy, and it was really a very prosperous time as far as I'm concerned. And during that time, we got into the heavy-duty wrecking work and had started out with one big tow truck and then eventually had two, and covered a wide area on salvaging vehicles that were upside down, loaded with coffee, chocolate bars, tip-top clothes, everything you could think of. So we acquired a float. Now that was merely a low-bedded trailer, which made it easy to load the various freight that was upset on these accidents. So we were in an ideal situation when in 1954 the deep water, I don't think it was called Seaway, it was a deep waterway system, was inaugurated.
I worked for Colwell Linen Mill, the home of the Golden Thread, and that was before the Seaway. I finished there in 1952. It was one of the best paid jobs around. I made a whole 45 cents an hour, and I was a winder, and my husband would make 60 cents an hour because he was a weaver. And it was good pay. There was no layoffs at that time. I don't think we had a layoff until maybe we might have had one just before the Seaway, but it was only just we were off on Fridays, but that was all. And it was always one of the better places to work.
In Mill Rush, it was the provincial paper mill at the heart of their steady economy. In the old towns, however, the most pronounced thing about life along the water was the sense of deep connection to the river. At the heart of this connection was the intricate system of canals and locks that ran along the shoreline.
I worked in the canal boats myself and the lakers after the Seaway. Like say coming down through the swing bridge at Mill Rush, coming off of Bergen Lake, our home was just a half a mile east of that, going around the corner, and I was with one captain that allowed me to get my swimming suit on, slow right down. He let me dive off the side of the ship. I'd go up the steps and give my mother a hug, and she'd drive me down to the next lock. So the old canal system was a lot of closeness with people and stuff like that. You were never that far away. You know, sort of thing.
In Morrisburg, the park across the locks greatly contributed to the town's reputation for beauty.
The park on the other side of the locks, there were beautiful flower beds there. There was like a stone wall that run around part of it where the boats went through there. And then up at the end of the park, there was boathouses where people kept their boats. And the water wasn't very deep. It was shallow, close to shore. And a lot of kids learned to swim there too on their own.
But the Morrisburg Park came to have a reputation of its own.
During the high school reunion, I showed my pictures to probably about 500 people that day. And Junior Castle was part of the audience. And when I came to the one picture I have of the park, I said, the older people here probably remember as a lover's lane. And I always promote people to get into a discussion about my pictures. And he said, we used to come back from Waddington on the ferry at 1 o'clock in the morning, and that was the last run. And we'd always go in a little extra close to the shore and shine the spotlight in. He said, be amazing the things you'd see.
Strengthening the connection to the river were the islands of the St. Lawrence. For residents of Mill Rush and Moulinet, and masses as far away as Cornwall, the favorite spot on the water was Sheik Island.
Sheik Island was a playground. Most of it was farmland, but other than that, it was a playground. The west end of the island, there was a park set aside up there by the Alt family years ago, and it was nice to see that after when the Seaway was decided on, that the Alt family, or ancestors that were living in the States, kept an eye on things, and they come up here and pointed the finger at Ontario Hydro. You got to replace that park. The rapids part of it there, it was just beautiful. There was an area on Alt Park on Sheik Island where you had to go down a steep hill. I don't know, look, maybe close to 100 feet to me. It was all sandy loam, and you catch your toes on the roots of the trees as you went down, so you could get control. But this bay down in there, and hundreds, thousands of people in there, on a Sunday and stuff like that. It was called Moonlight Bay. Aside from the powerhouse, the rest of the east end of the Sheik Island became a cottage haven that was loaded with cottages there, And there was another set of rapids, which we call the foot of Sheik Island rapids, and that was our fishing hole, sort of thing. And when you go right up into a set of rapids and drop the anchor, you just don't believe the size of the fish that come out of that.
Another island of the old river was Croyle Island. Like Sheik Island, it was very well known, if for a very different reason.
And then, of course, there was the old hermit on Croyle's Island called Tom Valance. And Tom, nobody knows why Tom came there. Somebody felt maybe he was he was in the army and was retired. Other people thought he was running away from a bossy wife, and someone else said maybe he had killed a man and that's where he was. But he sort of had this shack on the island, and Tom, a lot of the men went across from the mainland over to Tom's because he made the greatest bootleg liquor. He also had chickens and hens and cats and everything that shared his humble abode. He would pick berries many times in the nude, and when the fellows come over with their boats, he would yell, "You got any women with you?" So if they did, well, Tom would run in, get some clothes on, but he was quite an interesting fellow.
Further west, in Morrisburg, Broder Island was the site of many joyous family picnics.
They used to have the family picnic over there. And then they would take the ferry boat, and all the people from town would go. They'd have races, and there was a booth there that you could buy drinks and that, but everybody mostly took their own lunch. And they had races for the kids, and there was a bathhouse on there, and a good sandy beach that you could swim. And then there was a pavilion. Sometimes they had music there, and a lot of people camped.
Unfortunately, this deep connection to the river came at a price.
I remember when the Milverton and Trans Lake collided. It was my last year in high school, and I was helping on the farm before I went to school. And I had a brother that didn't like to do the milking very much, so I was milking 40 cows in the morning before I got on the bicycle to go to high school. And I heard our farm was about 1.25 miles from the river, and I heard a tremendous explosion. I went and looked, and the second time I went out to look, you could see the smoke coming up. And it wasn't too long after that till the road got awful busy, and it turned out that all the traffic was being rerouted at Iroquois, going back to the second concession road past our farm, and then got almost to Morrisburg before they would let it back out because they were afraid of further explosions. And I found out later when I went to high school what had happened, and there were two fellows who lived along there, Claire Van Allen and Jerry Kernell. They would have been maybe in their early 20s, and they saw the explosion and saw the fire, and they went out with their outboard motors and boats and rescued a number of people who jumped off the ship. In fact, Claire got, and I think maybe Jerry did too, Claire got some sort of an award from, it was, I think, sponsored by one of the brewing companies for his bravery in going out into the burning oil.
Not long after the Milverton sinking, a bus accident occurred where some 44 passengers veered off the road and slammed into the St. Lawrence.
Old Highway 2 between Toronto and Montreal, with all the buses, all the transports, all the passenger cars. And 4 o'clock in the morning, the Toronto Express bus, which would start out of Toronto and stop in Kingston and change drivers and go on to Montreal. It had 44 people on board, 22 were saved, 22 died.
The old towns and lost villages were different than the new ones of today. It was a different era, a different way of life.
Of course, there's a great deal of nostalgia connected with the old town and the memories we had of life was slow and easy and good, and the community was very united. They were a knitted community, and what affected one affected everybody. There was a closeness and a neighborliness that when you walked up street to the stores, you knew every house along the way, and you'd be invited in for a cup of tea on the way by. It was a little nice little town feeling.
By the Seaway, this way of life would experience great change as a new era along the river was ushered in.
The St. Lawrence Seaway started August 1954 and was completed July the 1st, 1958. During this period of time, 6 villages and 3 hamlets were completely submerged.
By 1954, the project, years in the making, became a reality. It was a move for the common good, for Canada's national progress. But this progress was not to be without sacrifice. To complete the project, the villages and hamlets from Millrush to Iroquois would fall victim to the flooding. Area residents had no option but to leave their village, witness the demolition and the burial, and start again on new sites in new towns. The sacrifice was enormous. It was a sad time, but also an exciting one. Countless construction workers and engineers from across North America descended on the small villages and began one of the greatest engineering projects ever imagined. It was scheduled to be completed in 4 years' time, and it would take every second of that period to finish it. To flood the areas and open the St. Lawrence for deep waterway shipping, some 6,500 people would have to be relocated. This meant either a new home in a new town or the same home with a new address. While the areas to be flooded were prepared and the new towns constructed, life along the St. Lawrence became life in a construction zone.
Going up and down the canal system at the peak of construction was just, you'd sit out on deck there and you just gazed. You just couldn't believe what was transpiring.
I would never want to go through it again, but I wouldn't have missed going through it for anything. The mud, the dirt, the dust, the noise. I remember the summer, Leona referred to the Euclids. They were earth movers that moved the earth that was excavated to make the canal. And they were putting it in the, what is now the golf course and park. And they had no mufflers, of course, and they ran 23 hours of the day. From 11 until midnight, they had an hour off for re-oiling and fueling up and then they started. And that summer was extremely hot, and there was no way you could have a window open. We had no air conditioning because the dirt and the dust and the noise didn't permit it. But I know for a long time when we were relocated here, and the schools and churches were just about the last to be demolished in the old town. So we had to get from here to church in the old town, and without streets or roads, and with all the big wheels turning up, it was constant mud and dirt. So we dressed for church and put on our rubber boots.
It created chaos, but it created quite a bit of income. Prior to the Seaway, wages were maybe 50 cents per hour, and all of a sudden along came the Seaway, and some people were making over $2 an hour. So it was chaos. You couldn't do the Seaway today like it did because, you know, there was dust, there was stones on the road, people know their rights. You know, it was just. And when I showed my old pictures, I have some pictures of Main Street here in Morrisburg and other streets, and it's just a pile of rubble, brick and sewer pipes and whatnot. And I often remark, I've never been in a war zone, but it was probably something like that.
However, within the war zone that was the construction, the house moving was an event to be experienced. The house moving, which allowed over 500 houses to be lifted from foundations in the old towns, carried along the road, and set on new foundations in new towns, provided a great deal of excitement.
One of the interesting things about the Seaway was the house moving. I think that was that sort of when you talk to anybody about the Seaway, they always talk about the moving of the houses. I think there was about 525 houses moved, and one of them was the 500th house moved was one that we lived in for 13 years. I bought it from Dr. Chenette. When they started the Seaway, they had interviews with the local people, and they were going to just demolish all the houses and build new ones. And there was an interest in the people, among the people, to why can't my house be moved, because it's fairly new or whatever, good construction, or I like it or whatever. And somebody got wind of this Hartshorn, who was from New Jersey, that moved houses, and they'd done it for many of the highways down through the U.S. And Bob Saunders, who was chairman of the Ontario Hydro at the time, apparently had a meeting with Bill Hartshorn, and the story is that he took it hook, line, and sinker and made a deal with Bill Hartshorn, and Bill loaded all the stuff on the train and brought it all up here to the area. And I believe they started in Iroquois first, and to move houses.
I was a kid at the time of the Seaway when it started. I was 8 years old in 1954 when the first house moved. And I remember my father taking me to see it being moved, and it was into the evening when they finally got around to moving it. They had tinkered and fiddled around all day, and finally they got it moving around maybe 7 or 8 o'clock at night. This was in the summer, I think.
The wife put a glass of water on the kitchen table, and they moved the house, put it on the new foundation, and never spilled a drop out of that tumbler.
As the new towns came together, life for those left in the old towns was one of inconvenience.
My major recollection was everybody was moved back to the new town except we people left on Iroquois Point. And it was a long walk to town with 2 babies to get groceries, and a long walk back. And then in the wintertime, it was dreadful going across those muddy fields with little boards laid down for sidewalks to go from out on the river back into the new shopping center.
Along with the challenge of living during the great upheaval that was the Seaway construction, dealing with Ontario Hydro was often a challenge for local residents.
The Hydro dealt individually with the people that they were being flooded out, and they had several options. They could take a cash settlement, and they were free, and the Hydro took over their house, and they took what they wanted out of it. Another option was they would get a lot. They would choose a lot in the new town, and they would get a cash settlement and the lot, and they could build a new house. Or they could have their house moved if their house was capable of being moved. So quite a lot of them are probably not up to snuff for to be moved. Anyhow, these Hydro real estate guys didn't have a very good reputation around town. In fact, Dick Roberts was an engineer at the Hydro, and he said, we don't speak the same language at all. He said, I don't want to talk to them. So they made deals with individuals, and they made what deals they had to make to get the deal made. Now, some of these were good, and some of these were probably not so good, but I don't think any of them were bad.
These deals that the Hydro land agents were paid to make did not always make life easy on area residents. Many renters, for instance, struggled during this time.
We were renting a house, or my parents rented a house, and as was said before, if you rented the house, the landlord sold the house to Hydro, and Hydro became your new landlord, and they just said your house will be moving on such and such a date, and it did. But we stayed in what they called a stopover house, and you were only out of your house for 1, maybe 2 nights, and it was like a boarding house type of thing, but you were there by yourself. They provided the beds and the bedding, and you got meal coupons to eat in the restaurant while the house is being moved. And as Jack said, we were treated fairly well from my point of view. We wouldn't have eaten that many restaurant meals in those days because my father did not have a great job in those days.
My present wife, she moved out here to Iroquois in this area, and she worked in the mill too. And eventually we were married and lived on Iroquois Point, and really enjoyed that point. It was always very cool, as it was mentioned here. It was between the river and the canal, a very cool spot. If it was too hot downtown, just go up on the point. It would go 5 degrees better. So it was a good place to start out when we started our family. And as she has said, we eventually Hydro just put us in a place downtown because we were renters. And it was like moving, we were showed a house, an empty house. This is yours. So the first thing you had to do is put in a new floor covering, new window blinds and curtains and all, just furnish the house. And Hydro said, that's fine, you just go right to it. And another good thing they did for us, my rent was doubled from what I was paying on Iroquois Point. It was basically doubled in the new town. So it just made it a little tougher to get going.
Still, in the midst of this questionable treatment, Ontario Hydro made an effort to make the transition easy when they could.
We had a choice as to where we were going to live and who our neighbors might be. You were asked to make a first and second choice according to your location on the town map. And there were 5 families of us who had lived in our same neighborhood in the old town, and we didn't want to be separated. And so we came back and made our choice, and we still remained neighbors in the new town.
They didn't count on moving near as many houses as were actually moved. But because of people are against, it doesn't matter what you bring up or propose, people were against it. And actually I feel that 99% of the people were well treated in the aspect of a house that you had moved. It was rewired where necessary. It had an oil furnace, an oil tank installed in the basement, laundry tubs, properly landscaped, driveways rebuilt, and small modifications made in verandas and so on.
In the end, how you were treated depended on your ability to negotiate. Overall, the outcome of the dealings with Hydro, whether it worked out for the best or not, seems to be in the eye of the beholder.
I don't think there was any bad deals. There was just some deals were better than others. So people compared what they got with somebody that maybe got better. Now, some of the things that people traded off and how you can't put a price on was large trees. You know, they had a big old maple trees or elms in front of their house, and then they would move back into a new subdivision where there was no trees, just field, and they were of an age that they weren't going to get new trees. You know, they had a river view. They were on the water and had a river view, and they were moved back. Now, how they got compensated for that, I don't know. But these are the parts of the deals that very hard to determine whether it was good or bad. It's in the eyes of the beholder. And but other than that, I think there was no bad deals. There were just good deals and really good deals.
Amidst the challenge of living in a construction zone, the challenge of dealing with Hydro, and the challenge of parting ways with a town that had served its residents so well for centuries, came opportunity.
In those days, because my father did not have a great job in those days, the Seaway was his salvation, I guess, in terms of work, because he got a job on the Seaway and was one of the last people to be let go when finished. He was still around in the early 60s working on all these houses that Hydro had become the landlord for and had to be maintained. My family ended up in Iroquois only because of the canal being here. My grandfather left Montreal during the Depression looking for work and headed west, and there was a job in Iroquois at the locks, so that's where he stopped. And the rest of the family joined him, and that's how we ended up here. If there had been a job in Cornwall, we'd be down there probably.
So I left the Hydro, I quit the Hydro, and purchased this used grader in Paris, Ontario, and went and got it and drove it down here, and I parked it at Federley's and made a deal with Jack Federley to leave the grader there and work out of his yard, and he would answer the phone for me and so on. So that's how I got started. And Ed Coleman was the super for the Iroquois rehabilitation in Iroquois, and I started working for Ed at Sun Oil Dock in May the 22nd, 1956, and I worked around here. I did some of the streets in Morrisburg. They're stripping them and getting them ready for the sewer and water guy. I did 5th Street from Highway 31 down to the end, down to Laurier Drive, and I did Laurier, and I did a couple other streets around there. And then the 1st of July rolled around, and I went down to Ingleside and worked for Harry Woods, an old friend of mine that I'd worked for before. And I was there about a year and a half. And the 2nd year we bought another machine, and I got my brother running it, and the 3rd year we got another one, and the 4th year another one, and so on and so on and so on. And here we are 50 years later, and we got quite a few of those things.
For us, it was an adventure, and we explored every inch of the new town, and we knew every house. And when Hydro worked on a house, they left it unlocked at night. We prowled through every house they had. We got rich collecting pop bottles because they left them all behind, and we went in every night at 5 o'clock and collected them all and cashed them in. I mean, it was just a great time to be a kid.
Finally, the day arrived. 4 years of construction came down to this. Inundation Day, July 1st, 1958. Suspense mounted as people gathered to witness the explosion that would trigger the flooding, reshape the landscape, and change life along the river forever.
We came out to watch the water come up, and we thought it was going to come up in about 5-10 minutes, and we stood here for hours and hours, and then finally we went on home because the water didn't come up at all.
Well, Inundation Day was July 1st, 1958. I remember that, and I remember it was broadcast on the radio because there was a big explosion at 8 o'clock in the morning, I think. And they blew out the coffer dam in Cornwall, which then allowed the water to fill up in creating this Lake St. Lawrence out here. So that process took a couple of days, and we went out for a drive that evening just to see where the water was coming up. And you could definitely see the water was coming up over the old highway, and things were unfolding as they should. But as a kid in those days, I didn't have a lot of recollection of the river as it had been. So we made the transition fairly easily. It was a lot more difficult for people who were older and had memories of the old river and the old town.
With this day in 1958, construction of one of the great engineering projects of the 20th century came to a close. The St. Lawrence Seaway and Power Project was complete. The old villages and hamlets between Cornwall and Cardinal that had stood in its way were washed away. The new towns of Long Sault and Ingleside, the newly situated towns of Morrisburg and Iroquois, have only memories of what used to be. The construction effort was a success, and by 1959, the new St. Lawrence Seaway was open as a deep waterway, connecting Montreal to the Great Lakes for ships with a draft of 27 feet. Vast amounts of hydroelectric power were harnessed. Canada had attained progress. And yet, the area that sacrificed so much in the name of this progress, in many ways, received so little.
I thought the biggest town that got let down was Cornwall. Cornwall was going to have a lock there instead of over Messina, because they were all ready for the lock at Cornwall, because the big stop log, if you go down there now, you can see where the entrance of the lock was. It was up by old Lock 19. But then Cornwall didn't come around to what they thought it would. It was going to be a booming place. And you know that today it's not very booming. Well, Morrisburg, I think it was 1860 when I was a lad. I don't know what it is now, 2300, 24.
I wonder why the population hasn't grown. Because we were given the expectation of it to grow so much that, as an example, the United Church is a pretty grand edifice. And it was built with the promise that it would needed to be to serve the people who would be living here. I ask myself many times, why did this town not develop and grow? I don't know the answer.
The sign said, we have to go, but watch us grow. We were to be 30,000 people, I think, in the projection, but as you know, we are still the same, I think, as we were in the old town.
While the Seaway failed to deliver on its promise for growth, the impact of the project was indeed great. It changed the physical landscape of the area, certainly, but it seemed to change a lot more than that.
Where they lost was the community in a lot of cases, and I think Iroquois and Morrisburg didn't do that, where I think that's why you got the lost villages to the east of us here. They lost their community, and they never did get it back. Ingleside is not Altsville, Ferns Point, Dickinson's Landing, Wales, Mulnet, Mulrush. It's Ingleside, and so the youth that grew up and was in their 20s or 30s or early married life, and then got that move to that new town, they seemed to felt that they lost their identity, and I think they did.
I think it changed everybody, because it used to be that you could walk along the street and stop in at any house on the street without phoning ahead and have a visit. After that, people seemed to grow apart, and you didn't drop in on people like we used to.
It changed the identity of individuals.
Every house that was moved, the antenna had to come off of that house and be stored until it was set on its new foundation a day or two later. And then I was lucky enough to land the job of taking these antennas all off the house, storing them until the house was back in its new foundation, and putting it back up. And so at that time, I had decided I didn't like to be in the textile industry any longer, and I was very interested in the electronic industry. So this job of moving antennas and one thing and another really prepared me for that. And Mr. Saver at the time, who was on the council, started selling TVs, and I was learning that trade. So any TVs he had sold that required repair, I was the boy he called to. That's how I got my start. And then eventually I met Jim Stiles, who was also later on became a council member, but he was moved off his farm. He had a farm. He was moved off the farm by Hydro, and he went into the electronic business, and we joined forces. And in 1957, we moved into the shopping center in Iroquois and started in the TV and appliance sales and service business. And we stayed in that business for 30 years together. So it changed, the Seaway changed my whole lifestyle, gave me a new identity from textile, working in a textile mill, and getting into this electronic trade.
The old towns and lost villages always enjoyed, more than anything, a sense of deep connection to the water. Today, in much of the Seaway-affected areas, this connection is all but gone. In Ingleside, where the residents of Wales, Dickinson's Landing, Ferns Point, and Altsville now reside, people are separated from their beloved river by the St. Lawrence Parks. And in Riverside Heights, made up of residents from the area between Morrisburg and Altsville, there is no river in sight.
In Riverside, where I live, we're supposed to have 20-foot sight lines to the river, so we could see the river at all times. And we fought that till George Jowett died, and we still have no sight lines to the river. And we still pay the same amount of taxes.
You know, when you think of it, there was a lot of tourist activity up and down the river. And one of the effects of the Seaway and the expropriation of all that land was that the government kept control of all the shoreline, basically between Morrisburg and Cornwall. You lost that element of people coming to stay in a cottage or a tourist home and spending their money locally. We've got so much parkland in this part of the country that we don't know what to do with it. It's grown up just to the trees and the willows. I'm not against that, but I think it's overbalanced in favor of parkland, and I think the whole economy between here and Cornwall has suffered because of it.
Further west, in Morrisburg and Iroquois, the presence of the water has been far better preserved. Unlike Long Sault and Ingleside, Morrisburg residents enjoy a beautiful waterfront park, an easily accessed beach, and busy dock. But still, something is missing. Broder Island, once the site of the famous annual community picnic, sits vacant and diminished, much of its former self claimed by the new lake. In Iroquois, many residents enjoy a view of the new Lake St. Lawrence, and at the point, residents of Iroquois may look down at the locks and enjoy the passing ships. But something seems amiss. Perhaps it is the great distance, miles in some parts of town, which separates residents from the water.
I used for the basis of my book the interviews which were conducted by people from the Lost Village Historical Society in 1979. This included the thoughts and the feelings of the old residents who were left about their moving from the old villages into the new towns. The theme that sort of ran through the whole set of interviews was that they adjusted, they thought, all right, but they still felt the loss of the St. Lawrence River. As one lady put it, they took a lot away from us. They took away our river. And I think that's how most of the people felt.
Although much has changed in the communities along the St. Lawrence, much remains the same. New traditions, such as the annual Tubby Race in Morrisburg, have replaced old traditions such as the boat races in Iroquois. And people can still enjoy the many things that earn the areas along the river their picturesque reputation: the 19th century homes in Morrisburg, Iroquois Point, and the Long Sault Parkway. All give area residents the opportunity to remember what used to be.
I know we lost some back in the Seaway days up here, but I don't feel it, and the people that move here don't feel that. They just see this wonderful community that has deep history and deep roots back in the times when life was maybe a little slower paced, a little easier to live, but we still have it. We still have that wonderful quality of life in a small town, rural, safe, where we can say people can work and live and just be home. It's a nice place to live.
While many residents of the former communities are nostalgic about life before the Seaway, it is important to remember that that life is a half-century old. Much has changed in society that is well beyond the Seaway's effect. But the Seaway is responsible for a number of the changes experienced in local areas. It was responsible for improving much of the town's infrastructure. It was responsible for creating jobs during construction, and it was responsible for providing opportunity for people to make their lives better. Today, many efforts are underway to reclaim the connection to the river. The Lost Villages Society has developed a museum and during the summer operates bus tours to the sites of the flooded communities, ensuring that the memories of life before the Seaway are not lost. The Gallup Canal Revitalization Project in Iroquois is seeking to restore the Iroquois waterfront by developing the old lock area that remains in Iroquois. And in Morrisburg, a Lions Club dockside canteen has attracted many people to the shoreline. Finally, the donation of the amphitheater in the Morrisburg Park by Les Cruikshank that celebrates his company's 50th year in business is sure to help reconnect even more residents with the St. Lawrence.
I always thought it was beautiful here with the canal and looking across at the islands. And so I guess maybe it's very seldom that life develops into something you liked when you was a kid that you eventually lived in. And it's come out with that with me. I've had 34 years here, and we often speak about it. I don't know where I could ever live that I would enjoy or be happier than where I am.
Although the Seaway project was a remarkable engineering feat, it is important now to recognize it has been a half-century since the project was completed. It is time to celebrate our greatest generation by remembering the sacrifice made so many years ago in the name of Canadian progress. And it is time to restore a river lost.
I stepped back through the sands of time, gazed out in wonder from that shoreline. I caught a glimpse of the people and their joy, wandered in the joys that existed there before, disappeared for the sake of progress for the people and the land, submerged beneath the waters that splashed upon the sand. Woolly neck whales and mill rush were familiar sights to me, Now beneath the waters lie the people's history. From Waltzville to Parents Point to Dickinson's Landing I did roam, now buried with past memories in the waters I call home. Now the years they rolled on and the rapids disappeared, and the lost villages where I spent my boyhood years. How the memories linger sweet, though some are lost with faith, and some are buried deep in the St. Lawrence Lake. Woolly Lent, Wales and Mill Rush were familiar sights to me. Now beneath the waters lie the people's history. From Waltzville to Parents Point to Dickinson's Landing I did roam, now buried with past memories in the waters I call home. Now the mills and the farmlands and the shops are history, and many a love and tear have passed in the book of memory. But now and then I linger there and gaze out from the shore. Through the sands of time remember what was there before. So if by chance you linger by, and if you've got the time, remember beneath the waters lie what was lost and what was mine. Disappeared for the sake of progress with the people and the land, submerged beneath the waters that splash upon the sand. I stepped back through the sands of time, gazed out in wonder from that shoreline. Woolly Lent, Wales and Mill Rush were familiar sights to me. Now beneath the waters lie the people's history. From Waltzville to Parents Point to Dickinson's Landing I did roam, now buried with past memories in the waters